Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Power Hour on IEP goals. What can a parent do? We're really lucky to have Julie Gardner here with us from Kennedy Krieger, and she's also a special education advocate. I will do her introduction in just a moment, but first let me tell you a little bit about our organization. We are the Pediatric Epilepsy Surgery Alliance, and we are the only nonprofit organization whose sole focus is serving the community of children anywhere on the epilepsy surgery journey, from the point of drug resistance through surgery, including the transition to adulthood and beyond. We empower our families with research, support services, and impactful programs before, during, and after surgery. Formerly known as the Brain Recovery Project, we're in our 12th year of serving this community. Our Power Hour sessions are brought to you by our corporate sponsor, UCB. Thank you for support, UCB. And just a little bit about Julie. So I've been lucky enough to know Julie for several years now, quite a few years. Julie joined us at a conference in, I don't even remember,
Florida.
Colorado? Florida. Conference in Florida for one of our family conferences several years ago. And we also have worked together on some cases with families of children who had hemispherectomy and needed more supports and more understanding for the school team. So Julie is an educational specialist at Kennedy Krieger Institute. She has a BA in elementary education and specific learning disabilities and an MA in varying exceptionalities. And she's currently in an ED program at Slippery Rock University. If you want to talk about what you're doing there, I find it quite interesting when we get there. Julie has over 30 years experience in special education, including private and public sectors. She's worked as an administrator and an IEP chair in public and private schools. So she's been on both sides of the table. She's co-owner of J&A Educational Consulting, which provides consultation and advocacy services to families involved in both the general and special education system. If you're not already working with an advocate and you're looking for one, I can't recommend Julie highly enough. There's my little plug for you, Julie, which I would give, I give willingly and freely. So go ahead and take it away. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for having me today. I am going to take a minute here and try to share my screen and get started. Oops, and I apologize. I don't think I'm on full screen just yet. There we go. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes, I can see that now.
You can see it. Okay.
Yep.
So I guess, thank you, Audrey. So today we're talking about how to write goals for IEPs and how to make sure that the goals that your team has proposed for you are what we call SMART goals, which are goals that are measurable in a lot of ways. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. So a lot of times in the work that I do, I review IEPs as part of my position, but then also talking with families, trying to make sure that their goals are the way that they want them written to address the things that they want addressed, right? So those are the big part of the IEP that we're going to be talking about today. So when we talk about what a SMART goal is, and you guys may hear this when you're at the IEP table with your teams, in SMART obviously stands for a couple different things. So it's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. And so we're going to talk about what all those different things mean and how to make sure that your goals are SMART goals. And that's going to sort of lead into next week's presentation, where we talk about then how do we measure progress across the year. Or across the IEP. So what does specific goals mean? Like I said, I review a lot of IEPs in my position, and a lot of goals sound really specific. And here's an example of one that sounds really, really specific, and it's got lots of details, and it's got a date that things are going to be done, and it talks about what the student's going to do, and it talks about how we're going to measure it. And a lot of times schools will present these IEP goals, but then when you read them, you say, what is my child going to be doing, right? Like, what is the end game for my student? And so when we talk about specific goals, they have to be specific, but they also have to be readable, and they have to be make sense to everybody who's reading that IEP. So for example, these are some goals that I pulled off some IEPs that I looked at in the last month, preparing for this presentation. And, you know, Jenna's going to learn to read this year by the end of the year with 50% accuracy was a goal from a Baltimore City public school IEP. Not to call out Baltimore City, but that's where that IEP goal was written. And it's a little bit concerning because we want Jenna to learn how to read, but we also want to know what that means for her. This is another one that it's a behavioral goal that was from an IEP in, I think it was Atlanta, that Roger's going to stay in a seat all day by the end of the school year. And we can see what the intent is of this goal, that we want Roger to be in his seat so that he can pay attention and he can learn. But I don't know how measurable this goal is. And then finally, that little Brody's going to add all the numbers on grade level without support with one verbal cue with 80% accuracy 4 times in a row. That was almost word for word an IEP goal that I recently read. So these are the kinds of things that really frustrate me with IEPs, and I'm sure it frustrates you guys as families, but it's also a school's attempt to write a good goal. And so that's why the better we can write these goals, the better we're going to be able to measure progress. So then what does make a measurable goal? So what I did, and Audrey and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, I made up a list of rules for us to follow for these goals. So when we look at our goals, and we have a graphic organizer for families that we're going to send out after this presentation, we talk a little bit about these 6 steps for what is a measurable goal. And number 1 is under what circumstances. So what are the conditions under which our student or your child is going to achieve this goal? And so we took Jenna's reading goal and we're going to make give it a circumstance. So given a list of pre-K level Dolch sight words in 14-point font with every other word highlighted. So everybody that walks in that room can see that this is exactly how we're going to present this goal to Jenna. And then we want to see who's going to do the goal. One of my biggest pet peeves in IEP meetings is when I see goals that say the student will, which means that they just yank that right out of a word bank, or out of a goal bank rather, and put it into your child's IEP. I want to see your child's name all through this IEP so that I know every time somebody types something into an IEP, your child was at the forefront of their mind. So I want to see who's going to be doing this. So in this case, Jen is going to do the number 3. What is she going to do? She's going to read all 40 pre-K level Dolch sight words. I can Google Dolch sight words pre-K level, and I can get the 40 words that Jen is expected to read. By when? By January 15, 2024. So I know that there's an end date to see whether or not she's met this goal or not. And then how proficient does she need to be at it? So in this case, that she's not going to make any more than 2 errors. In all 40 words, she's going to have less than 2 errors. And then how are we going to measure that? We're going to measure it across 4 different trials. So she's got to do that goal 4 times as measured by the teacher's log note. So this is how we're going to know at the end of the year that Jenna has met this goal. Okay. So then I always call this a janitor test. And when I talk to teachers in schools and I help train teachers in schools about how to write goals, I talk about the janitor test. I want anybody that's walking into that room, including the janitor, to be able to look at your IEP, sit down with your child, and take the data for that teacher. If we've met that standard, then that means that goal is readable and it's measurable. And so I pulled some other goals out of different IEPs, and I sort of applied the test to them. So if you look over here, here's those 6 steps on how to write a measurable goal. And I have a couple more goals here. Amanda will walk in the hallway 50% of the time with no more than 1 verbal prompt and no warnings. So again, this is what a typical IEP that I see on IEPs, where it says that what she's going to do and how often she's going to do it, but it doesn't meet all of our 6 steps for our rule list. The next one, by March 15, 2024, check. We know when it's going to happen. Given a grade level story with no more than 6 paragraphs and a Venn diagram graphic organizer. So we know what circumstances. Benjamin, we know who's going to do it, is going to complete the graphic organizer, identifying 2 similar traits and 2 traits specific to each character with 100% accuracy. So from this goal, we can see exactly what Benjamin's expected to do. And then here's another one, giving prompting. Alexander will participate in class appropriately with 80% accuracy, 4 out of 5 trials. That again, another very typical goal. It's very minimal goal, but it doesn't meet the 6 steps. So when I talk to teachers about their goals, or I talk to families about their goals, I want to see all 6 of those rules applied to all of their goals. And if that's not the case, then we go back to the drawing board and we say, you know what, this goal is not measurable and it's not specific enough. So that's kind of where we have to start with before we can tell if our students are making any kind of progress. So the next part is, how do we know, and this is a question I get from families a lot, how do we know that this IEP is written in a way that my child will be able to attain the goal in the next year? So a lot of times goals are written either too easy or way too hard for students. And so I always say, let's start back with your child's profile. What is reasonable for your child's situation? And then, is it providing access to the general ed curriculum? So always, and if you know me, you know that I always go back to those present levels. So the present levels of performance, their functional academic performance, need to be as comprehensive as possible. And I think I did one of these power hours a while ago about this, that this is where the IEP is built on. This is the utter foundation of your IEP. So in those present levels, we need to make sure that not only what your child can't do is listed, but what your child can do, because that's the jump off point. And Audrey always has a great analogy for this about being able to run a marathon. And if you go to a trainer and say that you want to run this marathon, the first thing they're going to say is, what can you run today? So that's part of that present level. That's part of building that foundation, so we know where those goals are going, are starting from. So then, and do your goals include active, what I call active vocabulary, right? Or active terminology. So does it say exactly what your child's going to do? So if we go back to see Jenna's goal, it said that she is going to read those 40 words. That's active terminology. It doesn't say she's going to understand or she's going to get better at, but that she's actually going to read the words. That's what's measurable. In some IEPs, we're going to see things, the short-term objectives, and in other IEPs, we might see benchmarks. And both of those things are going to help us make sure that these goals are measurable across time, that we can check in periodically and make sure that we're kind of making baby steps towards that big goal. And the other piece of this is there a corresponding special ed service? I have a student that I'm working with who has his primary disability is hearing impairment, but he doesn't have hearing services on his IEP. So the fact that it doesn't make any sense to me that he's got hearing goals, but there's no hearing specialist going to work with him, or a vision goal and no vision specialist is going to work with him. How is he going to meet that goal? And then finally, is it guided by grade level standards? These grade level standards are what should drive every IEP, regardless of levels. And we want to make sure that we're hitting all areas of grade level standards on these IEP goals. And then relevance is another area that I like to talk to families about. The priorities for IEP goals need to come from not only the classroom teachers and what they think, or the specialists at the school and what they think should be on your IEP, but you as a family have to be included in what is relevant. So if the IEP team wants to propose, 5 goals in 5 different areas, but really what's important to you in terms of writing is that your child can write their first and last name. That needs to be included as part of the goal, because the relevance piece of it comes from the grade level access, but it also comes from the parents' input, as well as the professional statements of the folks on that team. So we have to think about relevance too, because you can't possibly write a goal for everything that everybody needs all the time. You'll never get anything done. So we want to be able to sort of prioritize those goals year to year or semester to semester, depending on the student. And then finally, the big part is time bound. So at what point do you evaluate the progress on these goals? A lot of times I see people write goals in September and they say, we'll see you next September and we'll let you know how that went. And that to me is kind of the most frustrating thing when it comes to goals, because lots of times kids meet goals long before a year is up. And a lot of times we write goals for them, and then it's the first semester goes by and the second semester goes by and they're not making any real progress. And you don't know that until half a year's gone by or the summer's gone by. So that's why I always say to families, here's a little secret. We can write shorter term goals and we can ask for periodic reviews of that data. So if you have a goal on your IEP and there's questions in your mind about, well, I don't know if this is really relevant, or I don't know if this is really attainable, you can say, you know what, let's meet again in 6 weeks and see where we're at. Let's see in 6 or 8 weeks whether or not my child has made any progress whatsoever on this goal. And if not, it's okay to change that. It's okay to amend the IEP goal. It's okay to say, you know what, my student's doing way better than we thought we would with this goal. So let's increase the standard. Let's ask for more. Let's try to do it a different way. And you are more than able to do that. I have one school up in Pennsylvania that I meet with every single month because the student's profile is so unique that the changes happen frequently for the student. So we do meet monthly to review data, to make sure that we make adjustments on these IEP goals, to make sure that we're still meeting the family's needs, and to respond to the student's profile, which is a very changing profile. So those are sort of the big steps that I always say we want to cover when we're looking at writing SMART goals for students on IEPs. I want to stop here just a little bit. I know it's a bit of information, and I want to see if there's anybody that has specific questions or thoughts on this, or if you want to talk about your own child's IEP goals and we can sort of troubleshoot them. I'm happy to kind of leave it a little bit more informal moving forward so that we can address the family's goals that are for folks that are on the call right now.
That's super helpful. That's a great overview. And hopefully some of you got some tidbits out of that. Are there any questions? And we also had some that came in advance.
Yeah.
If you have questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A. So a parent asks, do you recommend always having short-term objectives? And we talked about this yesterday. So why don't you share what we discussed yesterday?
I do. Yeah, I definitely would like to see short-term objectives on IEPs, because if the goal is such that your student is going to go from, if they're going to go from point A to point B, it's very difficult to measure that over a 9-month or a 12-month period if you don't have short-term objectives along the way. Like I said, I made reference to Audrey's favorite analogy, which is running the marathon, right? So if you say today, I want to run the marathon, and you can't run around the block, we can't say a year from now you're going to run the marathon if we don't have steps along the way to check in with you and say, you can run 1 block, you can run a half mile, you can run a few miles, until you can get to that point. So the same thing with reading, same thing with behavior, same thing with math. It doesn't matter what the goal is. I have a hard time with schools who don't include short-term objectives on the IEP, because otherwise it's just sort of free for all. And then you might get 9 months into a school year and they say, oh yeah, let me let you know he didn't make that goal. And it's too late. You've lost a year or 6 months or a semester.
Can I make a couple points here?
Sure.
So when IDEA was reauthorized in 2004, they did change it so that short-term objectives or benchmarks were no longer required unless the child was on an alternate diploma. And I'm hoping none of you are putting your child on an alternate diploma anytime before middle school, or maybe at all. We can talk more about that. But so you may have teams that say we don't have to do that. They don't want to. But like Julie said, it's very important to have those short-term objectives, even if it's just for your own understanding. I have many families that I work with whose children have had epilepsy surgery, where they have a meeting every 8 weeks with the team to review progress on goals. So even if there isn't a short-term objective, they're really able to see where the child is. And if we're going to talk about progress next week, so just a little teaser, but if you get a goal, a comment on a goal, and I've seen this exact comment on a high school student's goal that I was working with last year. Luis is doing so well on this goal. We're really proud of his progress. What does that mean? It means absolutely nothing. Right. So if the goal was written, Luis will transition from class to class throughout the day with no more than 3 redirects and no verbal outbursts, with 80% accuracy in 5 out of 5 trials. I want to know, and what was his baseline? His baseline was he needed 30 prompts and he was constantly having outbursts, right? So I want to know, well, what does the data say? Where are we in that 80% range? It's, how many outbursts is he having? How many redirects is he having? Are we inching towards that? And then it also can tell you if you're 8 weeks out and we're like, I can still only run 2 blocks, right, on my marathon goal. Then it's like, well, maybe this isn't the right goal, right? Maybe this is too lofty of a goal, or maybe we need to increase the intervention, the intensity of intervention in order for us to meet this goal, right? So it's giving you also a check-in about what do I need to do to make sure that we're, on the right track. The other thing is parent participation. So when IDEA was reauthorized in 2004, they emphasized and strengthened the parent participation part of the law, which means that if you say this needs to happen, they can't just say no. They need to give you a reason why. Technically, they're supposed to use a form called prior written notice, which includes the basis for their refusal. What did they use as their reason to say no? So when you say to the team, I think it's really important, my child made almost no progress in math last year. I want us to meet every 6 to 8 weeks to really see what's happening with this new multisensory evidence-based math curriculum that we're going to put into place this year, if you get that. And we need to meet every 8 weeks to discuss this. And they say no, they have to explain why. Why are they refusing to do this? So I just want to make that point. Do you have anything else on that first question, which was about having short-term objectives?
Yeah, no, I just answered, I'm sorry. Let me look back real quick. Lillian, I just answered her Nora too, in the chat, that in the short-term objectives, I say, if you have short-term objectives, you should be having quarterly data reviews. You should be looking at those short-term objectives and making sure that the data is supporting the fact that your child is making progress.
Yeah.
So
or
yes.
It could be shorter. It could be
or it could be shorter.
Yeah.
It could be shorter. Yeah. I also like to line up sometimes with, so here in Maryland, they do 9-week quarters. So I've asked, can we do a 4.5 week data check, and then can we do a 9-week data check for some objectives if they're that sensitive, if it's a behavior that we're trying to really get a handle on. A lot of times I ask, can we meet again in 4.5 weeks and make sure that what we agreed to is working, because we should see some change. Maybe you're not going to meet the goal in 4.5 weeks, but you should see some change with that intervention in the first 4.5 weeks. And then at that point you can say, all right, let's wait another 9 weeks before we meet again. But I just try to really hold them to the data, to see the data really regularly. Yeah.
Okay. There's a question that says, I see the goals that are not well written, but can you show us how that well rewritten goal would look like? And this is a great question. Would you mind reopening the goals that you shared that were bad goals, and let's rewrite them?
Yeah, let's do that.
And if anyone has a goal that they'd like to know, is this a good goal or not, you can put it in the chat or in the Q&A and we can help you rewrite it.
Sorry, let me just get back to those. There it is. So if you look at Amanda, she's going to walk in the hall 50% of the time with no more than one verbal prompt and no warnings, which I'm not sure what a warning is, but so under what circumstances? So let's go through the 6 steps together, right? So under what circumstances? Amanda is a 5th grade student. I happen to know her. So I do know that she's in an elementary school with, crowded hallways. So under what circumstances? In Amanda's case, I recommended that we say in an uncrowded hallway. So Amanda has a lot of trouble with crowds. So she kind of stops walking when there's a lot of crowds. And so I said, let's start off this goal and let's just see if we can get her to do this behavior in the hallway without a crowd. So she releases 5 minutes early from the class. And I said, under what circumstances, meaning in an empty hallway? Number 1, Amanda will walk. So we have Amanda, that's step number 2. What is she going to do? She will walk in the hallway. Now, the problem is that there's one hallway that's super long and there's one really short hallway that's next to the cafeteria. Amanda does great in the super long hallway because there's no distractions. So what I said when we rewrote this goal is I want to start Amanda in an empty hallway. Amanda will walk in a short hallway with no distractions. And then in parentheses, we literally put the back B hallway because that's the school that she's at. And I said, so when will the outcome occur? I think we did it by the end of the quarter. And what proficiency level? So I didn't like the 50% of the time because I felt like, I'm not sure how we're going to measure the 50% of the time with one verbal prompt and no warnings. So what we did was we kind of erased all of that. And we said that she will walk in the long hallway with no distractions and she will do it 100% of the time with adult support and 2 verbal prompts along the way. So that's how you would really give her a picture of what she needs to do. And when she was successful in the long haul, then we'll include the shorter haul later on.
So what's happening with that is, so I call it the given. The under what circumstances is the given, and there's 2 types of givens, okay? So what Julie just talked about is the accommodation given. Given this particular setting and this particular support. And I've had teams say to me, well, the student has a list of accommodations. And if you've seen my son's IEP or most kids post-hemispectomy, they have 300 accommodations.
Right.
So then I say to the team, which of all those accommodations are using on this goal? And they're flipping through the pages and they have no idea. So you're giving the team, you're giving the janitor who can pick up your child's IEP the opportunity to say, oh, this is exactly what I need to be doing when I'm working on this goal. I need to make sure we're in hallway B. I need to make sure it's quiet and there are no distractions. I need to be making sure that I'm the adult support. I need to give her 2 prompts. You might even describe what the prompts are in the goal. The goal can be long. There's no, it could be a paragraph long, right? There's no limit to the length of a goal. You don't want it 5 pages, but so that would be one thing. Another given might be what training or instruction the child is going to receive in order to achieve the goal, which is something I like to see in goals. So given daily practice when no students are present, right, for 15 minutes a day with a para, and comma, Amanda will then walk in the hallway the way we want her to, right? But if we don't explain how she's going to get to achieving that goal, then it might be, again, how is a janitor going to know, right? So, or anyone that picks up the IEP, or there's a substitute teacher or substitute para, whatever. So, all right, goal 2.
So the middle goal, I like, I don't know if Audrey has any thoughts. By March 15th, 2024, given a grade level story with no more than 6 paragraphs and a Venn diagram graphic organizer. So we can picture in our head exactly what's going to happen. He's got a grade level story, no more than 6 paragraphs, and the Venn diagram sitting next to him. Ben is going to complete the graphic organizer. And what is he going to do? He's going to have 2 similar traits. So 2 traits in the middle, and then 2 specific traits for each character on the 2 big circles of the Venn diagram with 100% accuracy. He's going to get it perfect.
Yeah.
So that's the goal. It's a pretty lofty because it's got to be 100%, but in this case, Ben might be able to do it.
It's hard to get teams to write 100% goals, by the way, because Julie's an advocate. She probably gets a little more traction than a parent might. So here's how I would write this goal. The couple things that I would change just based on my experience with teams. Again, what's the given? What's the training that he's going to get to do this? So given, what kind of training would you need to learn how to complete a graphic organizer, Julie? What would he need?
So, I mean, just in this student's case, he graphic organizers were part of his IEP, right? So that was one of the things that across his curriculum, he always has graphic organizers. You could say, verbal prompting. I don't love verbal prompting because that looks different to everybody, what the prompts are. So given highlighting, you could say highlighting the story.
Okay. So I would say something like given specific instruction in using a graphic organizer and creating a Venn diagram during his weekly resource time or something like that. Very specific, what it is, when it's going to take place, right? Grade level story. I cannot tell you how many IEP teams have put this in the goal and they are working to the child's grade level, not the grade level they're in. So you want to be very clear, what grade level are we talking about? Are we talking about the grade level the child is reading at or the grade level they're in? And if they're not the same, you need to be very specific. If your child is working at a grade level that is not the grade level they're in, that's a whole separate conversation to be having with a team about how do we get them to grade level, right? But if this child is is in 6th grade and is reading at a 6th grade level, working at a 6th grade level, I would say given a 6th grade level story. The other thing I might want, I see a lot of IEPs in California might be different, East Coast, West Coast, whatever, where they have how many trials, right? So I see goals written like with 60% accuracy in 3 out of 5 trials or whatever. That if you do the math, that's like they almost never do it. If I went to work and I had 60% accuracy 3 out of 5 days, I would not have a job, right? So I like to see at least 80%, which is a B- in the world of academics, just in to, make it pretty basic. And I like to see 80%, and I like to see 5 out of 5 trials. And sometimes you'll get pushback on that. The other thing is the trials as measured when. So I don't want all 5 trials to be the week before progress reports are written, right? 5 out of 5 trials measured weekly, measured daily, measured every class period. I don't know what it is, but not like we're going to do 5 assessments of this skill the 5 days before progress reports are due. What if the kid has the flu or their grandfather just died or the bus was late and they don't get those trials? We're not getting accurate data. So I know it sounds like a lot, but if it isn't in writing, it didn't happen. That's the #1 rule of IEPs in general, and conversations with your IEP team. If it wasn't in writing, it didn't happen. So those are just some tweaks I might make.
Yeah, and to your point too, that's why those data meetings are so important. Because if you're waiting to take data for the IEP a week before the IEP is due, then you're going to know that unless you're having these data meetings, right? So if you have a quarterly data meeting or every 4.5 weeks or 9 weeks or whatever it is you're deciding to do that makes sense for your child, if you're saying, I want to see the data, then they're going to have to take the data to show you at those meetings, right? And then you can spread that data collection out across the quarter or across the semester so that you can see that, yes, these are being worked on every week or whatever, and somebody is actually tracking whether or not you're making progress.
Yeah. All right, next goal.
Okay, so given prompting, Alexander will participate in class appropriately with 80% accuracy, 4 out of 5 trials. A better attempt at the 4 out of 5 trials and the 80% accuracy, but I don't know how you measure his participation with 80% accuracy.
And so also, what is appropriately? What is participating in class appropriately? That could mean a lot of different things, a lot of different people.
Right, and a lot of different teachers might say that, well, Alexander didn't throw his pencil today, so that's appropriate. But that somebody else might say, well, he didn't talk in class, so that I call appropriate. So, so there's a lot of things that this particular goal leaves to the imagination about what is progress on this goal. So how do we do this one? Under what circumstances, right? In his general ed English class, right? That's a circumstance. Or in his resource classroom. Again, that's a circumstance. Alexander will. So what are we going to say about participating in class? He will engage in peer conversations 2 times over the course of a 15-minute lesson. Something like that, to that level of degree. And Audrey, you're better at finessing
it could be
goals.
things like maintaining attention to task for 5 minutes without a prompt or a break. But so what could happen is, like, you can imagine all the things what an appropriate class participation would look like. So then you're talking about this with your team and they want to squish it all into one goal. Well, then how do you measure that? So then I'm going to say, no. He needs a social goal. He needs an attention goal. He needs a behavior goal, not throwing the pencil, right? He needs a work completion goal. So it might actually, this might actually end up being 6 or 8 goals, right? I hear a lot, their child has too many goals. Do you want to speak to that? Because I have something to say about that. I'm curious. Like, what
too many goals. There is nothing legal about how many goals you can or cannot have. I do caution against 500 goals, because at that point, it's impossible to do anything but take data on the goals. But I do think that when schools tell me that they're concerned that the student has too many goals, then I go back to them and say, we need to look at all areas of disability, and we need to address how are we going to close the gap between where the student is currently and where our end game is, right? Where the general education curriculum is. So if that student needs that many goals to do that, then that's what we need to do.
Yeah. I think so. Goals drive services. This is things that parents don't understand. They're like, well, my assessments say my child has very severe ADHD and can't pay attention for more than 2 minutes, but he has no services to address that. And then we look at the goals, and guess what? There are no goals around that. So what you need to do is go through the present levels, actually start with your assessment reports. And what I do is GAS, this is my little thing that I do. I don't know, everyone has their own system. Goals, accommodations, and services. So I will highlight or circle or underline, and then I'll write next to it a G, an A, or a S, or sometimes I'll write all three, right? Because sometimes we need a goal, an accommodation, and a service. Sometimes it's partly addressed in the IEP, and sometimes it's not addressed at all. So you're looking at like, what is the need? The need is walking in the hallway without, without freezing and stopping because of distractions, right? So that's the need. So we need the goal, the accommodations we just mentioned in the goal, but whatever accommodations we put in the goal, we want to make sure are also listed in the accommodations and the supplementary aids and services. And then what is the service, which is part of why I like the given X instruction in the goal, because then at the end of the IEP, you say, oh, look, in order to work on this goal, it looks like she's going to need 20 minutes of daily para support to work on the hallway goal. She's going to need, 30 minutes a week in resource to work on the Venn diagram goal. And with all these class participation goals, he's going to need an hour a week to work with the special ed teacher, the behavior support specialist, and the speech and language pathologist to work on those goals, right? So now you see how we've gotten services. So when they say there are too many goals, tell me what your service grid looks like. I've seen IEPs that have no goals and no services. The present levels are fine. They've got everything there, but they haven't written a goal or put any services in. So goals drive services. You don't want it to be so much, like think about your daily to-do list. If there is not enough time in the day to provide the services to help the student meet the goal or for the student to actually work on these goals, it's probably too many goals, but there has to be a balance. It can't just be. One other thing I want to say about goals too, is that what I like to tell parents, two things. This should not be complicated. It should be, I want the child to walk from one end of the hallway to the other without freezing or being distracted, right? That is a very simple, I understand it, you understand it, the janitor is going to understand it, right? The child, Amanda, has a hard time getting from point A to point B. If you don't understand the goal, it is not a good goal. Or the team needs to train you, which parent training is part of federal law, on how to understand your child's IEP, how to participate in your child's IEP if you don't understand the language they're using. But plain language, take the testing scores out of it, and they'll be like, oh, that's just a phrase we use here. You can say, I don't understand it, and I can't participate in my child's IEP if I don't understand the goals and the way they are written. So at the end of the day, when you read a goal, you want to know, what will my child be doing when this goal is met? And if you look at the goal and you don't know that, then turn to the team and say, what will my child be doing when the goal is met? Take some notes, and then they're going to say blah, blah, blah. And you're going to be like, great, that's the goal. Write it like that. Write that, not this convoluted, et cetera. I don't know if the parent who asked or anyone else has a goal or even just an area of need that they'd like us to try to write a goal on. If not, we have questions that came in advance that we can also address. So if anyone has anything, just pop it in the chat, but maybe we'll go through our other questions that came in.
Yeah, it looks like Nora asked about what is an alternative diploma. And so an alternative diploma, it's called different things in different states, but basically what it is anything that's not the general ed diploma. So I know Virginia has a couple different options. I know other states have other options. And so it's for students whose curriculum is not the general ed curriculum. So if your child is working on alternative standards or alternative curriculum, then likely they're going to be earning an alternative diploma, which looks different than they're not meeting the high school standards in terms of general ed diploma.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question. I
have a lot to say about this topic. If you want to watch any of the transition webinars, which even if your child is 5, it's not too early to learn about transition. Earning credits to graduate happens in high school, right? That's the diploma we're talking about. You earn your diploma in high school, but you should know what track your child is on always. Most kids that are put in self-contained classrooms or SDCs are considered to be on a non-diploma track, on a certificate of completion track. And parents often don't know this. They're not informed about it. You need to know what diploma they're on. And I had once I was working with a child who had a hemispherectomy. She was 5 years old, and the team said she needs to be on the alternate diploma. And I said, why? She's 5. we don't know what kind of progress she's going to make, right? So as long as possible, you want to have the child work towards grade level content with the right supports in place, and see where they get. I wouldn't make the decision to move a child to an alternate diploma track until at least middle school. But you also need to know if you're not keeping, I always made it very clear with my son's IEP team, I'm expecting my son to go to college. I'm expecting him to graduate with a regular diploma. I'm expecting him to master grade level content, even when he was at times 2 or 3 years behind in certain subject areas, right? But you need to know, and if your team hasn't told you, ask. And if they're saying, well, we think your child needs to be on alternate diploma track, that should be a lengthier conversation as to why. Graduating without a regular diploma is an incredible barrier to future success. You cannot be a janitor in a public school without a high school diploma, period. And that alternate diploma is not viewed as a real diploma.
Yeah, and can I just make one really quick thing, and this is completely off topic, but be very aware when you're going through your IEP process that when they're talking about alternative curriculum, or they're talking about alternative standards is another way I've heard it read. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about removing your child from the general ed diploma track, right? And so I've heard schools talk to families about it without explaining that one negates the other, really. And so I've had an elementary school family agree to have their child put on alternative standards, not realizing that meant an alternative diploma in, another 7 or 12 years. And so just be very careful when they're talking about anything alternative, what exactly that means for your child. I just want to make sure that families are aware of that conversation.
It's a hard path to recover from. If you go down the alternate diploma track in elementary school, they're not preparing your child for high school to earn those credits to graduate. There's nothing in the literature that says children after epilepsy surgery cannot master this content. They are mastering literacy and numeracy at a rate comparable to their peers, given the right supports, right? And if you can have them do our school training so they really understand what supports are needed for the child's specific surgery. I'll put that link in the chat in a minute. Do you want to go through the questions that came in advance? Because I think some of them are interesting, or you kind of pick and choose.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
Do you want to put yours back up?
Sure.
Okay. And then that way I can pull up my notes. So some of the questions that came in prior to this was a family that was asking, their child is just starting the school adventure with a 4-year-old, and they wanted to know what are some good things to look out for. And so my big advice to families is making sure, especially when you're in those early years, or really year to year when you're updating your IEP, is making sure that your IEP's present levels are as robust and as comprehensive as you can be. Because I always kind of refer to the present level of performance, functional and academic performance, that's sort of the foundation of your IEP. That's the building blocks of your IEP. So like Audrey said, if you're including areas of concern or areas of need in your present levels, then you're giving yourself a good foundation to write really good goals and really robust goals. If you're including areas of strength in your IEP, then you're really sort of building the case for where your child can start and where your child can go, right? So I think it's important to make sure that your present levels are as strong as they can be, especially as you're coming into this whole process. The other part of that is, as Audrey said, when IDA was reauthorized, is how much emphasis has been put on family involvement in your IEP process. And so having a really clear parent statement, your expectation that your child will graduate high school with a high school diploma, put that in your 4-year-old's IEP so that you are setting the bar for my child will continue to stay on diploma standards. Make sure that your priorities are put into that parent statement as well. Audrey?
Well, it makes me crazy that I forget to mention this because I think it's so much a central part, but there is a section of every IEP that is the statement of parent concerns or statement of parent
input statement.
Parent input statement, or it's called different things. Most of the IEPs where I've helped families, there's nothing written there. Parents didn't even know they could. You can write a novel, right?
Yes,
they can't tell you it's too long, I think they can be too long, so be very careful. What I like to do is pick the top 3 things I want my kid working on for that year. And like Julie just said, I expect my child to go to college. I expect, whatever it is that your expectations are, even if you don't know, no one knows what their kids are going to do, right? But what your hopes and dreams and expectations are for the child. I would say keep it relatively brief. It's also an opportunity to correct any errors in the present levels, because sometimes I've seen teams refuse to remove inaccurate information from the present levels for various reasons, without a reevaluation or whatever. We're not doing a reeval right now. That'll get changed later. So the parents can say, literally in their parent statement, which they need to put in verbatim, by the way, you ask them to cut and paste it right into the IEP, and they'll say, we don't have room. And you'll say, then make it an attachment, but there's always room. These forms are expandable, but then you can say, that it said X, but it's actually Y. I think this question that just came up in the Q&A about the child's been taken off gen ed track and put on a curriculum for mod severe disabilities, but the child's cognitive skills are improving recently due to treatment that he's receiving. So this would be a place to 2 things. 1, your parent concerns letter, which you can write at any time and ask them to you can call an IEP meeting at any time. You can have an IEP meeting every month if you want, right? You have to have a reason to call an IEP meeting. It can't just be, I want to look at you. But if you're saying my child's cognitive function has changed, I'd like to have an IEP meeting to meet to discuss what the appropriate curriculum is right now. And here's my statement of parent concerns. And your statement might be, his cognition has changed. I believe this curriculum is inappropriate. And my goal is and continues to be for him to achieve grade level progress, as much to the extent possible, or however you want to word it. Do you have anything to add there, Julie?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and it's interesting that you should say that, things have changed for your child, because that is sort of the ticket in the door for an IEP meeting. Anytime you have new information to share with the IEP team, you should be holding an IEP team meeting. So new information covers this, that your child has made progress with something and that you want to change something about that IEP. But yeah, and at any point you can definitely call and say that. Have they taken him off the gen ed track? It's hard to tell just based on what curriculum they're using with them. How do I get him back as his treatments are improving? Yeah, definitely have that IEP team. It's appropriate right now. She's saying that the IEP, the curriculum is appropriate right now, but you're hoping that it won't be in the future. So that's where the the goal monitoring comes into effect, right? So if he's making progress on his goals and he's making it quicker than you anticipated, that's a great thing. So then you update your IEP more frequently.
Yeah. Nora, you had your hand raised. Would you like to speak? I'm gonna click allow to talk. Ask to unmute. If you'd like to just speak.
Sure.
There we go. Okay, so you had your hand raised.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. The question I have is, my daughter is in kinder and she was assessed in the spring and got an IEP with placement in the regular classroom in Illinois. And then, we're 6-7 weeks into school and the school has called an IEP meeting saying the original IEP was written to generally. And this is really timely because they just emailed me, what are your parent concerns? Can you just talk about when the school calls an IEP meeting, what does that mean?
You want to go, Julie, or you want me to?
Well, it depends, right? They're saying that the IEP was written to generally. Was it a pre-K team that wrote the IEP?
There was a pre-K team, actually. Her placement was originally in pre-K for 6 weeks. So, yeah.
Okay. So they're saying that they can't measure the goals that were written on that IEP. That's what it sounds like.
Okay.
Good for them. So let's write some smart goals for her.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I would say it probably is because now she's in her new placement. It's a whole new team. There's different set of expectations, and they're maybe seeing what she can and can't do.
Right.
It's also a great opportunity to say, I'd like you, the Pediatric Epilepsy Surgery Alliance offers a free 2-hour training to school teams, which is tailored for whatever epilepsy surgery your child has had. And I go in, I meet with the team for 2 hours and I explain auditory processing disorder, all the vision impairments, the sensory issues, the executive function, the motor, the social emotional behavior, all of the issues that might come up as a result of epilepsy surgery, because honestly, when we talk about making progress on goals, if they don't understand the child's basic needs, right, these functional sensory needs, and they're just sticking her into a class with whatever curriculum, no matter how good the curriculum is, it doesn't mean that she's going to learn, right? So you want to make sure that she's receiving appropriate interventions in an appropriate setting with appropriate supports. So I agree. I think that the team wanting to meet with you is a great thing, because it's going to give you an opportunity to talk about what her needs are. Make sure, has she been assessed in all areas of suspected disability? Was the evaluation in the spring a psychoed or a neuropsych?
It wasn't, no.
It was not a neuropsych?
No, it was done by the public schools.
Yeah. So was it comprehensive? So if it wasn't comprehensive enough to look at all areas of suspected disability, then it's not valid and you're entitled to an IEE. And that's where you could ask for a neuropsych, or you can just say, look, you did a psychoed, but my child has a brain-based injury. They need to have a neuropsych evaluation. And I'd like to work with you on that. We have some sample letters. I'll send some resources after. This is sort of a separate conversation. I have literally written on my notebook in capital letters, start with assessments, and it's circled like 5 times. And Julie did mention this at the beginning. If your IEP will only be as good as the assessments, right? So again, let's go back to our metaphor of the marathon. I call up a gym and say, I want to run a marathon next year. Great. We'll send you a plan. Click, right? And then I get a plan to run a marathon. How good is that plan? I can't run a block, right? Like, I have bad knees. I can't run a block right now. So if they don't know that and they're just writing a plan based on like, I want to run a marathon, it would be a terrible plan for me, right? So what they need to do is assess where I'm at. What is my current fitness level? What are my injuries? How much time do I have every week to dedicate to my goal? Right?
And
what can I
do?
And what can I reasonably expect to do? And it might be for me, because I can't run a block. You're going to need intensive intervention. You're going to need a personal trainer 2 hours a day. You're going to need a dietitian. You're going to need, right? Do you see how now we're building the services based on the need, because we've had an appropriate assessment? If you don't have that robust assessment, it's going to be really hard. We have a webinar series that's just IEPs after epilepsy surgery. It's 5 webinars that goes through all the assessments that might be needed and really explains the IEP process. And since you're at the beginning of this journey, I highly recommend you watch it. I will send that in the follow-up resources that we have. And Julie has some other resources that she's going to send, or that we're going to share after. Do you want to talk a little bit about those, the SMART goals and the...
Yeah, I have I have a sort of a graphic organizer, because I'm a very visual person, that you can literally, Audrey's going to send it out, and you can literally take it and fill in the parts of your goal that you do have into the graphic organizer that says, I do have under these circumstances, that's in my goal. I can clearly see it. I do have what my child's going to do, but then when it talks about how you're going to measure that, that's missing from my goal. That's where you want to go back to your team and say, I have all these on this goal, but I'd like to rewrite this goal so that it meets all 6 of these criteria. And I would suggest that families sit down with their IEPs, take this, and if you have 12 goals, copy it 12 times and really write in each of those goals into the graphic organizer so that you're clear with what's in your goal and what's missing from your goal.
Yeah. And I'm going to include another handout, just hopefully not to overwhelm you. So you can ignore my handouts and just look at the SMART goals graphic organizer if you want. But there was a Supreme Court case I believe it was in 2020, January 2020, called Andrew F. You may have heard of it. And it changed the landscape of special education, which basically said that that all kids, the IEP must be reasonably calculated to help your child make progress. And so there's a talking points sheet, and then there's a worksheet that's more of a graphic organizer. And you can do the same thing where you list the areas where your child is below grade level and why do you believe your IEP won't help your child reach grade level, or where your child hasn't made progress. What do you think might help? This is just a way for you to start writing out your input. So when you go to that IEP meeting, you get to participate fully. And the term parent participation is an important one. So anytime you are cut off or not allowed to give input, you can say, I'm concerned I'm not being allowed to participate fully in this IEP that is being developed for my child, because there's a very strong component of the law. That and child find, which is about that comprehensive assessment. So those two pieces are really big parts of this process. You had another handout on neurodivergent children. And I mentioned yesterday to Julie that a huge percentage of the population of kids after epilepsy surgery will have some sort of neurodivergency. And they may have an ASD diagnosis or not, but they'll still often present with the needs and behaviors and et cetera of a child who has, has an autism spectrum disability. So we will have that handout will come to you as well, which is a nice handout looking at like accommodations for students with autism, ADHD, et cetera. Anything you want to add there?
I was going to say, we also, another one of the questions that came in earlier was about functional goals. And there's a number of goal banks out there. I just caution people to, when you're looking at goal banks, not to sort of cut and paste, but to really look at it as sort of a jump off point for your child, and then adjust those goals that make sense for your student. But it can be helpful to sort of look at leveling of goals and things like that. So I'll make sure that we share some of those links as well. And I know that the Epilepsy Alliance has a really nice goal bank too that Audrey's putting together for folks. And then can we just address this question real quick about somebody asked about, they have a student that they worked really hard to get a structured reading program, and they were asking about a structured math program. One thing that families aren't aware of that I think a lot of times the schools don't tell them is that you can always ask the curriculum specialist from your county to come to your IEP meetings. IEPs are written on, based on grade level standards. So if you have a child with a reading or a math or a writing disability, and you want to know what other services are available within your county, every single county and every district is going to have a curriculum specialist in that area. And you can ask for those folks to come to your IEP meeting to talk specifically about that area. So this mom that's looking for the math person should probably have that person at their IEP meetings.
Yeah. I had a conversation earlier today with another parent who couldn't attend today. The child is being given a, off the shelf standard math curriculum. They're not really putting accommodations in place. They're not addressing the visual impairment. Math is being taught in a loud classroom. And so it's like, again, really looking at all the variables. What is the setting, first of all, appropriate? Is it at the right time of day for that student, right? If math is their worst subject, it should be taught at the optimal time of day. If they're most tired in the morning because they just have a seizure, not a great time to teach math, right? Or if they're more fatigued in the afternoon because of their hemiplegia, then maybe you want them academics in the morning, that kind of thing. But then asking for that literacy curriculum, I asked her, have you opted out to standardized testing? And guess what? Last year she did. And so sometimes if you don't have evidence-based multisensory instruction in literacy, numeracy, and writing, don't opt out of the standardized tests yet, because you can use that as a data point to say, look, my son failed the state standard testing, and they're going to have all kinds of reasons why. But the law says, the NJRF handout that I'm going to show you says the student needs to be, their IEP needs to be aligned with grade level content based on state standards. And so if they're failing the standardized test for your district or your state, that's a data point to say, okay, so this intervention clearly isn't working, which leads me nicely into at the top of the hour here that next week we will be talking about what happens when progress is not being made and what we can do. So if you can maybe come with next week thinking about, here are some goals on my child's IEP that are well written, right? They're good goals, but progress is not, and I think the intervention is appropriate, but the progress is not being made, or any example you have of progress not being made, and we can discuss that more next week. Any final thoughts, Julie, before we go?
No, I'm just happy to help support people. If you have any questions, I think Audrey has my email address and it's on every billboard in America at this point. So feel free to call me or email me if you have a quick question. I'm happy to help.
Yeah, I will be sharing Julie's contact information with the follow-up as well. She does do advocacy nationwide, and she's phenomenal. So I highly recommend, and if it's not Julie, to be working with an advocate if at all possible. This is a long slog, and the SPED world is full of acronyms and just, you know, it's hard to understand. It's very hard to navigate. We joke around that it's harder than brain surgery to navigate the IEP process. And
I believe that.
yeah, so if you can work with an advocate, it's a really good recommendation. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Julie, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.